Every day we come more to realize the importance of a balanced approach toward living. At this time, nearly everyone is off on some kind of a tangent. And as a result of having lost central stability, these good people are more or less constantly agitated, worried, frightened, disillusioned, and gradually lose health as well as happiness. The answer seems to be a diversification of activities. We are now being educated to specialize. In the next 20 years, we probably will produce 10 or 15 million commuter operators. We'll have computers everywhere. We will have the individual training for this from infancy. And by the time it is proper for him to go out and establish a home or raise children, he will be at a hopeless disadvantage. He will not know anything about the normal processes of living. This same problem is present in most of our educational institutions. They are all built to produce specialists. They are produced to increase the depth of knowledge in some given field. And it now takes many, many years to complete a basic education in a highly specialized field. The individual who is looking for a doctorate will be lucky if he graduates in his 30s. In the older days, things were quite different, and in some ways more reasonable. Back in the days of Greek learning, education was largely in the keeping of a few professional teachers who fulfilled all the chairs of their students' needs. These teachers were persons widely acquainted with the processes of living. They were teaching the individual how to become useful without becoming hopelessly indoctrinated in something. Philosophy was largely the instrument of ancient learning, and philosophy was nearly always grounded in personal experience and demonstrated or proven by its solutional powers. The individual grew up to be a thinker. He did not simply accept the thoughts of others. He did not consider himself educated simply because he had read the approved authors. He was taught from the beginning the emergencies of immediate living. In those older days, institutions were not as complicated as they are now, but problems have been with us since the beginning. And the ancient systems of learning were largely directed at solving problems and producing persons capable of individual existence. This does not mean that these individuals turned against each other or were competitive, but it simply meant that the person, through the development of his faculties, was able to come to useful conclusions about his own needs. Having been presented with a problem, he used the native faculties with which he had been endowed to solve that problem. He was taught to believe in the solutional power of his own judgment. And, in most instances, this solutional power worked until the development of highly specialized scientific techniques. As the fields of knowledge broadened, they became, in a sense, deeper and, in another sense, more shallow. In the case of developing industrial structures, the individual was bound to make a living. He had to follow the approved rules of his time. He had to train himself for a job. This in itself, of course, was a limiting influence. And the more precarious his economic situation, the more intensely he specialized his abilities. striving always for an excellence in some field. Now in the 20th century, we have an almost incredible diversity of activities. These activities are not any longer simply jobs. They're careers. They're lifetime dedications. They are devotions based upon the need for financial security. These infinitely diversified activities, however, do not seem to diversify the capacity of the individual to meet problems. He must try to solve his problems in terms of the learning he has received. And a large part of modern learning has nothing to do with solving problems except economic stability. The learning makes the individual fit to earn a living, but does not equip him to learn to live a life. He is deficient in the natural, homely aspects of intelligence, which our forefathers seem to possess in reasonable abundance. So today we have people who sort of live on little islands. These little islands are of many kinds and types. Among the more interesting of these islands, perhaps, is the religious island. Here individuals belonging to certain beliefs isolate themselves from the beliefs of all other people and settle down to defend their own convictions. To depart from these convictions is heresy, and the person who is brought up in a narrowed religious community is subject to persecution even today for nonconformity. Therefore, in religion we have a group of people to whom religious matters are supremely important. Now, no one doubts this importance, but we can doubt the attitude of the individuals involved in most instances. The importance of the subject is not primarily sectarian. Religion is not important because it teaches a dogma. Religion is important because it inspires a way of life by which the individual is capable of facing the emergencies of living. If we take, therefore, religion on the level of utility, basic usefulness to man, sectarianism has a tendency to retreat, because we find that nearly all religions are useful to the needs of people, and persons of many different beliefs depend heavily upon their spiritual convictions for the courage for daily living. Therefore, the purpose of religion primarily is to give us a new sense of value by which we can live more constructively and have greater incentives to integrity. Now, in the actual course of religious growth, we also find another important peculiarity which we need to consider. One of these special points is that the individual has gradually allowed religious attitudes to dominate secular living without moral conviction. For example, the point we want to make is that the person constantly thinking about religion, reading about it, allowing it to completely dominate his life, often neglects the very use for which religion was intended. He becomes absorbed in doctrines. He becomes so completely immersed in certain religious attitudes that he loses track of other values in life that are very important also. Christ said to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are His. Many religious people today simply deny Caesar. They render nothing to him. They make no serious effort to adjust to problems of daily living. Others must come to them. They will not go out and join in any general, practical, spiritual procedures. If this happens, then religion, instead of being an ever-present help, becomes a menace to the integrity of the person. if he would have the virtues of faith without becoming obsessed by the techniques of theology, he would be much happier, wiser, better, and more useful to society. But if he allows religion to paralyze his natural integrities and to force him into a position in which he can naturally mingle only with his own believers, who will not modify his position to meet the emergencies of the day, but continues in a dogged adherence to something which he probably does not even understand. If he takes this attitude, he is in trouble. Now, on the other end of the scale, we take the scientific thinker. Here is a person who has a commitment that is just as devout, just as emotional, and perhaps even more intense than many religious devotions. To the scientific mind, the exploration of the unknown has become practically an obsession. He must advance knowledge at all cost. But the problem he constantly faces is that the knowledge he most needs eludes him. He can find a great deal of interesting information, but the type of knowledge which would enable him to live well in his own family is not always available. He becomes addicted to a great project. He becomes a crusader, trying to expand the knowledge which we possess and broaden the horizons of our understanding. But actually, he is working largely with an abstract situation, and he will go down to his grave with all others without having solved the reason for his own existence. He is not able to allow his natural devotional instincts to have a proper play. He becomes, in a sense, possessed by the tremendous adventure of learning, and therefore does not pause long enough to make learning a value in his daily existence. Again, the only real value he gains is perhaps a more substantial income from his scientific attainments. As a person, he does not grow very much because he is locked in an attitude. Now, most people do not become quite that much locked. And the common citizen, the average person that we all meet, know, and mingle with, is not as intense as this in his allegiances. But he also can be a desert island in the community where he lives. He can be without the necessary instruments of understanding to be a useful, cooperative, constructive citizen. These things he has to take into very serious consideration. Now, we may say, for instance, that a person comes home from work and is tired and has earned a living, paid his bills, or found out where to borrow enough money to pay them temporarily. And what does he do? He probably settles down in front of the television to forget it all. He wants relaxation. He wants release from pressure. He wants to get away from the utilities into something which he hopes will prove an interesting avocational outlet. If he is at all intelligent, he will realize that he is sadly mistaken, that he is not getting any outlet, that he actually is building more and more nervous tension into his system, that he is learning nothing that is important to him, and he is suffering greater tension shocks than he would in the ordinary procedures of his daily business life. One other point is very important. Most entertainment is imaginary. Most entertainment is a form of propaganda. It is dedicated largely to creating an audience which is best held by shock and stress.